The moving truck pulled up to 247 Maple Lane at exactly 7 in the morning, and Marcus Bennett sat behind the wheel staring at the pale yellow house with the wraparound porch like a man who had just lost a war. His 7-year-old daughter Destiny sat in the passenger seat beside him, her small arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant that had belonged to her mother, her eyes red from crying during the 3-hour drive from their old apartment. The house in front of them was beautiful in an old-fashioned way, with hanging flower baskets and a porch swing and lace curtains visible through clean windows. But Marcus could not see any of that beauty right now. All he could see was his own failure reflected back at him in every painted shutter and every carefully tended flower bed. He had lost a bet to his younger brother Deshaun 6 weeks ago, a stupid bet made over too many beers on the anniversary of his wife's death, and now he was paying the price. The terms had been simple. If Marcus lost, he had to accept help. He had to stop pretending he could handle everything alone. He had to move into the house that Deshaun had found through a community housing program and give it an honest chance for 1 full year. Marcus had been so certain he would win that he had agreed without hesitation. Now here he was, unemployed, nearly broke, moving his grieving daughter into a stranger's home because his pride had written a check his circumstances could not cash. If this story already has you wondering what happens next, take a second to subscribe to Acts of Depth. Every like and share brings more stories about the unexpected moments that change everything. Now let me tell you about the woman who opened that pale yellow door and welcomed Marcus Bennett into the year that would save his life. Her name was Jolene Harper, and she was not what Marcus had expected. She was a large woman, heavy-set in a way that made her presence substantial and grounding, with warm brown skin and natural hair pulled back in a colorful wrap. She wore a flowing dress covered in sunflowers and an apron dusted with flour. And when she smiled, it was the kind of smile that seemed to reach out and wrap around you like a blanket. She was 28 years old, unmarried, and had been running this community housing program out of her grandmother's old house for the past 3 years. She took in families who had fallen on hard times, charged rent on a sliding scale based on what people could actually afford, and asked only one thing in return: that everyone who lived under her roof treated each other like family. Marcus stepped out of the truck and shook her offered hand with the stiff formality of a man who did not want to be there. Behind him, Destiny clutched her elephant and studied Jolene with the wary eyes of a child who had learned that new places usually meant new disappointments. "You must be Marcus," Jolene said, her voice carrying the musical lilt of a Louisiana upbringing. "And this beautiful girl must be Destiny. I've heard so much about you both from your brother. Welcome home." The word home landed on Marcus's chest like a weight. This was not his home. His home had been a 2-bedroom apartment where his wife Candace had hung wind chimes on the balcony and sung Destiny to sleep every night. His home had been the smell of her perfume on their pillows and the sound of her laughter echoing off walls that now belonged to strangers. This yellow house with its flower baskets and its smiling stranger was just a temporary stop, a consequence of a bet he should never have made, a reminder of everything he had failed to provide for his daughter on his own. "We appreciate the room," Marcus said flatly. "We'll try to stay out of your way." Jolene's smile never wavered, but something in her eyes suggested she had heard words like these before and knew exactly what they meant. "Staying out of the way isn't really how things work around here," she said gently. "But we'll have time to figure all that out. Right now, let's get you both settled. Destiny, do you like chocolate chip pancakes? Because I just happen to have a batch ready in the kitchen, and I made way too many for just me." Destiny looked up at her father, waiting for permission. Marcus hesitated, his instinct to refuse any kindness warring with the practical reality that his daughter needed to eat, and they had been driving since 4 in the morning. Finally, he nodded once, and Destiny followed Jolene into the house with slow, careful steps. Marcus watched them go, then turned back to the truck to begin unloading the boxes that contained everything left of his old life. The first week was an exercise in awkward coexistence. Marcus kept to himself as much as possible, spending his days searching for jobs online and his evenings sitting on the porch staring at nothing. He accepted Jolene's meals because Destiny needed to eat, but he contributed nothing to the conversation that flowed around the dinner table each night. There were 2 other families living in the house, A young mother named Rosa with twin toddlers and an elderly man named Walter who had lost his wife and his pension in the same cruel year. They all ate together every evening in the big dining room with the lace tablecloth and the mismatched chairs, and they all seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. Marcus sat at the edge of this warmth like a man standing outside a window in winter, too proud to knock and too cold to walk away. Jolene noticed everything. She noticed how Marcus's jaw tightened whenever someone asked him a personal question. She noticed how Destiny's eyes followed every movement in the room, cataloging escape routes the way children learn to do when their world has become unpredictable. She noticed the photograph Marcus kept on his nightstand, a beautiful woman with Destiny's exact same smile, and she understood without being told that the weight this man carried was heavier than anything she could see. But Jolene also noticed something else. She noticed that Marcus always washed his dishes after every meal, even when she told him it was not necessary. She noticed that he had fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door without being asked. She noticed that late at night, when he thought no one was watching, he would check on Destiny 3 or 4 times before finally allowing himself to sleep. This was not a man who did not care. This was a man who cared so much that caring had become a kind of prison. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week. Destiny had been having a particularly difficult day, the kind of day that arrived without warning and turned a quiet child into a storm of tears and incomprehensible grief. She had been doing homework at the kitchen table when suddenly she pushed her papers away and began to sob, deep racking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far below her small body. Marcus rushed in from the living room and knelt beside her, his hands hovering helplessly, his voice repeating her name like a prayer. But Destiny could not stop crying. She could not explain what had triggered the flood. She could only clutch her elephant and shake her head and whisper the word mama over and over until the syllables lost all meaning. Jolene stood in the doorway watching, her heart breaking for both of them. She knew she should give them privacy, should let this family handle their own pain the way Marcus clearly wanted to handle everything. But something in her would not allow her to turn away. She walked into the kitchen, lowered herself into the chair beside Destiny, and began to sing. It was an old song, a hymn her grandmother used to sing while hanging laundry in the Louisiana sun. The words were about rivers and rest and the peace that waits on the other side of sorrow. Jolene's voice was not trained or polished, but it was warm and true, and as she sang, something remarkable happened. Destiny's sobs began to slow. Her breathing began to even. Her small body, which had been rigid with grief, gradually relaxed until she was leaning against Jolene's soft arm, her tears still falling but no longer tearing her apart. Marcus watched in stunned silence as this woman he had been so determined to keep at a distance did something he had not been able to do in 18 months of trying. She reached his daughter. When the song ended, Destiny looked up at Jolene with red-rimmed eyes. "Do you know any more songs?" Jolene smiled. "Baby, I know songs that haven't been invented yet. Songs are one of my specialties. Would you like to hear another one?" Destiny nodded, and Jolene began a new melody. Something softer and slower about stars and wishes and little girls who were braver than they knew. And Marcus, still kneeling on the kitchen floor, felt something crack open inside his chest that he had kept sealed shut since the day he buried his wife. That night, after Destiny had fallen asleep clutching her elephant, Marcus found Jolene sitting on the porch swing with a cup of tea. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled like wet earth and possibility. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before finally stepping outside and lowering himself into the chair across from her. "Thank you," he said. The words felt rusty in his mouth, like machinery that had not been used in too long. "For what you did today. I've been trying to help her for so long, and He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Jolene sipped her tea and said nothing, giving him space to find his words. "Her mother died 18 months ago," Marcus finally continued. "Cancer. Took 8 months from diagnosis to the end. Destiny was there for all of it. She watched her mother disappear piece by piece, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't fix it. I'm her father, and I'm supposed to protect her from everything. And I couldn't protect her from the worst thing that ever happened." Jolene nodded slowly. And you've been trying to protect her ever since by carrying all the weight yourself. By not asking for help. By pretending you don't need anyone. Marcus stared at her. How do you know that? Because that's exactly what I did when my grandmother died. Jolene set down her tea and looked out at the rain-washed garden. She raised me after my parents passed. I was 13 when they died in a car accident, and she took me in without hesitation. This house was her house. She taught me everything I know about cooking, about singing, about making people feel welcome even when the world has been unwelcoming to them. She paused, and her voice grew quieter. She died 4 years ago, and I spent the first year after her death trying to prove I could handle everything alone. I gained 60 pounds because I was eating my grief instead of feeling it. I pushed away everyone who tried to help. I nearly lost this house because I was too proud to admit I was drowning. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since he had arrived. He saw the lines of old pain around her eyes. He saw the way her hands wrapped around her teacup like she was holding onto something fragile. He saw a woman who had survived losses he understood, who had made mistakes he recognized, who had somehow found her way back to a place where she could help others instead of just suffering alone. What changed? He asked. Jolene smiled, and there was something bittersweet in the expression. I realized that my grandmother didn't raise me to be an island. She raised me to be a bridge. She spent her whole life connecting people, feeding people, making space for people who had nowhere else to go. When I was shutting everyone out, I wasn't honoring her memory. I was betraying it. She looked directly at Marcus, and her eyes held no judgment, only understanding. Your wife loved you and Destiny more than anything in this world. I know that because of how deeply you both are grieving her. But if she loved you that much, do you really think she would want you to suffer alone? Do you really think she would want Destiny to grow up watching her father refuse every hand that reaches out to help? The question landed like an arrow in the center of Marcus's chest. He thought about Candace, about the way she had always been the one who brought neighbors casseroles when they were sick, who organized birthday parties for children whose parents could not afford them, who never met a stranger she did not try to help. She had been the most generous person he had ever known. And he had been honoring her memory by becoming the opposite of everything she believed in. I don't know how to do this, Marcus admitted, and his voice cracked on the words. I don't know how to let people in. I don't know how to be the father she needs. I don't know how to keep going without her. Jolene reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her grip was warm and solid and absolutely certain. You don't have to know, she said. That's the whole point. You just have to be willing to try. And you have to be willing to let people try with you. The months that followed were not easy, but they were transformative. Marcus found a job at a local construction company, starting at the bottom but grateful for the honest work and the chance to provide for his daughter again. Destiny began to emerge from her shell, drawn out by Jolene's patient kindness and the chaotic warmth of a house full of people who had all survived their own storms. She started singing the songs Jolene taught her, started helping in the kitchen, started laughing in ways Marcus had not heard since before her mother got sick. The stuffed elephant still went everywhere with her, but now it was joined by new companions. A handmade doll Rosa's mother had sent from Guatemala, and a wooden car Walter had carved during his long evenings in the workshop Jolene had set up in the garage. Marcus and Jolene grew closer in ways neither of them had expected. He helped her with repairs around the house, discovering that the place needed far more work than she had let on because she had been stretching every dollar to help her residents instead of maintaining the property. She helped him learn to talk about Candace without falling apart, sharing stories and memories and keeping his wife alive in ways that brought comfort instead of only pain. They took walks together after dinner, talking about everything and nothing, building a friendship that felt like something more without either of them being willing to name it yet. One evening, almost 9 months after Marcus and Destiny had arrived at 247 Maple Lane, Destiny asked a question that changed everything. They were sitting at the dinner table, all of them together, Rosa and her twins and Walter and Jolene and Marcus and Destiny. The meal had been Jolene's famous jambalaya, and the conversation had been light and easy, the kind of conversation that happens between people who have become family without anyone officially declaring it. Destiny had been quiet for most of the dinner, a thoughtful look on her face that Marcus had learned to recognize as the precursor to something important. "Daddy," she said, and the table gradually fell silent as everyone turned to listen. "Is Jolene going to be my new mommy?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Marcus felt his face grow warm. Jolene's eyes went wide, and Rosa hid a smile behind her napkin. Walter chuckled softly and suddenly became very interested in his water glass. "Destiny," Marcus began, but he did not know how to finish the sentence. "Because I've been thinking about it," Destiny continued, with the devastating logic of a 7-year-old who had been given too much time to think. "And Mommy is in heaven, and she told me before she went there that she wanted me to be happy, and she wanted you to be happy too. And you're happy when you're with Jolene. I can tell because you smile more. And I'm happy when I'm with Jolene because she sings me songs and makes me pancakes, and she never gets tired of my questions, even when I ask a lot of them." Marcus looked at Jolene, and Jolene looked at Marcus, and something passed between them that had been building for months without either of them acknowledging it. It was not the wild, consuming love of youth. It was something quieter and perhaps even more powerful. It was the recognition of two people who had been broken by life and had somehow found in each other the missing pieces they needed to become whole again. "Well," Jolene said slowly, her voice carrying a tremor that Marcus had never heard before, "that's really something your daddy and I would need to talk about privately. But I can tell you one thing, Destiny. No matter what happens, you will always have a place in my heart and in this house. You are family to me. You have been since the day you walked through that door." Destiny nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and returned her attention to her jambalaya. But under the table, Marcus reached for Jolene's hand, and she took it, and neither of them let go for the rest of the meal. The conversation happened later that night, on the same porch swing where so many important words had been exchanged over the past 9 months. Marcus told Jolene that he had not expected to feel anything again after Candace died. He told her that he had been so focused on surviving that he had forgotten it was also possible to live. And he told her that somewhere along the way, without planning it or looking for it, he had fallen in love with a woman who had taken in strangers and made them family, who had seen his broken pieces and decided they were worth keeping. Jolene cried when he said that. She told him that she had spent years believing that no one would ever see past her size to the person underneath. She had been mocked and dismissed and overlooked so many times that she had almost accepted invisibility as her permanent condition. But Marcus had never made her feel invisible. From the very first day, even when he was distant and guarded, he had treated her with respect. He had seen her as a person, as a woman, as someone whose opinion mattered and whose presence had value. "I didn't fall in love with you despite anything," Marcus said, taking both her hands in his. "I fell in love with you because of everything, because of who you are, because of the way you love my daughter, because of the way you taught me to live again when I had forgotten how." 6 months later, they were married in the backyard of 247 Maple Lane, surrounded by everyone who had ever passed through Jolene's house and found healing there. Destiny served as the flower girl, and she carried not a basket of petals but her mother's photograph. So Candace could be present for the new beginning that she would have wanted more than anything. Rosa's twins served as ring bearers. Walter walked Jolene down the makeshift aisle, his eyes shining with tears as he gave away the woman who had become like a daughter to him. When Marcus kissed his bride, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests could be heard 3 blocks away, but Marcus barely heard it. All he could hear was the sound of his own heart, beating strong and steady for the first time in years, no longer carrying the weight of grief alone. He had lost a bet to his brother, and it had cost him his pride. But what he gained in return was beyond anything he could have imagined. He gained a partner who understood that love is not about perfection but about presence. He gained a mother for his daughter who would teach her that kindness is the greatest strength. And he gained a home, a real home, where the flowers always bloomed and the table was always full and nobody ever had to survive alone. If the story touched your heart, if you felt something shift inside you as this family found each other, then you understand why stories like this matter. Subscribe to Acts of Depth and share this video with someone who needs to remember that the best things in life often come from the places we least expect. Sometimes we have to lose a bet to win everything. Sometimes the person we overlook becomes the person we cannot live without. And sometimes, the home we never wanted becomes the home we were always meant to find. Deshawn still teases Marcus about that bet. Every Thanksgiving, when the whole family gathers around Jolene's table, he raises his glass and reminds everyone that Marcus owes his happiness to a stupid wager made over too many beers. And every Thanksgiving, Marcus raises his glass right back and says the same thing. Best bet I ever lost.